Chapter 1. The Call I Never Answered. The night Maya died, my phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. I saw her name flash on the screen, and I let it ring. It wasn't the first time. Over the past few months, she had called me more times than I could count, and I had ignored almost all of them. Sometimes I watched the phone vibrate, feeling that familiar lump of guilt settle in my throat. Sometimes I turned it over, pretending I hadn't seen it. Other times, I blocked her number just for a while just to make it easier. But that night, I hesitated. Maybe it was the way the rain hit the window, soft yet relentless. Maybe it was the way her name, glowing against the dark screen, made something inside me ache. Maybe it was the fact that deep down, I knew I should answer, but I didn't. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that it was just another call, one of many, that whatever she had to say, I wasn't ready to hear it, and so I let it go to voicemail. I remember every detail of that night, the way the streetlights outside flickered, casting long, shifting shadows against my bedroom walls, the faint hum of the ceiling fan, the half-empty coffee cup beside my laptop, long gone cold, the unfinished emails staring back at me, work I had no real interest in completing, and the silence, the kind of silence that creeps in when you're alone with your thoughts, when you know you've made a choice you might regret, but you're too stubborn to change it. I should have picked up, I should have said something, anything, but instead, I stared at the screen, watching as the call ended, and then, a second later, a notification popped up. One new voicemail. I didn't open it. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even when I heard the news. Maya was gone. The words didn't make sense at first. They came to me in fragments, whispered through hushed phone calls, murmured in texts that I read but couldn't process. Accident. Hospital. Didn't make it. I read those words over and over again, waiting for them to feel real. They didn't. Not when I scrolled through old messages, rereading conversations we had when things were still okay. Not when I looked at the last text she ever sent me, just a simple, "Can we talk?" Now frozen in time. And not when I sat in my car outside her house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to gather the courage to step inside and face the reality I had been avoiding. Even then, it still felt like a mistake, like someone, somewhere, had gotten the story wrong, because Maya was the kind of person who was always there, loud, stubborn, impossible to ignore. She was the one who always had something to say, who filled every silence with laughter or anger or some sharp-witted remark. Maya didn't just disappear. She couldn't, ... but she had. It was 3 days after the funeral when I finally pressed play. I sat alone in my car, parked in an empty lot, my hands shaking as I put my phone on speaker, and then her voice filled the space around me. "Hey, I know I shouldn't be calling, but I just needed to hear your voice, even if you don't pick up." I closed my eyes. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, and I hope you're happy. I really do. Silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "Goodbye, Ayan." The voicemail ended. I played it again and again, until her voice was the only thing I could hear, until I realized that she hadn't been calling for closure. She had been saying goodbye, and I hadn't answered. Chapter 2. The Words That Haunted Me. The voicemail sat in my phone, untouched, for days. I wanted to listen to it. I needed to. But every time I unlocked my phone and saw the notification unheard voicemail, a cold weight settled in my chest, making it impossible to breathe. I wasn't ready, because once I pressed play, there would be no turning back. Once I heard Maya's voice, she would no longer be a memory trapped in old texts and fading photographs. She would be real again, real and gone, and I wasn't sure I could handle that. It was late at night when I finally gave in. The world outside was asleep, and so was everyone in my house. My parents had stopped asking if I was okay. My friends had stopped texting. The only sound in my room was the ticking of the clock on my wall, loud, steady, unforgiving. Tick, 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 each second stretched into eternity as I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, staring at the notification. I hesitated. What if it was nothing? Just another one of her usual calls, filled with words I had already heard before. What if it was something worse? What if she had needed me, truly needed me, and I had left her alone? The thought sent a sharp, twisting pain through my chest. I swallowed hard, and then, before I could change my mind, I pressed play. Hey, I know I shouldn't be calling. The moment her voice filled the silence, my stomach clenched. It was her. Maya, but she didn't sound like herself. There was no fire in her words, no teasing lilt, no frustration laced with affection. The way it used to be when she called me after a fight. She sounded tired, but I just needed to hear your voice. Even if you don't pick up. I closed my eyes. I had picked up before, many times. I had stayed up with her on countless nights, listening to her rant about life, about work, about dreams she thought she'd never reach. But this time, I hadn't, and I would never get another chance. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. My throat tightened. Sorry for what? For the way things ended between us. For the fights, the distance, the words we threw at each other like knives. For loving me too much, or maybe not enough. Or was it something more? And I hope you're happy. I really do. Happy. The word felt like an accusation, because I wasn't. I wasn't happy when we broke up. I wasn't happy when I ignored her calls, and I sure as hell wasn't happy now, sitting in the dark, listening to a ghost whisper her final words into my ear. There was a pause, a long, empty silence that stretched just enough to make me think she had changed her mind, that maybe she had wanted to say more, but couldn't. And then, barely above a whisper, "Goodbye, Ayan." Click. The voicemail ended. For a long time, I just sat there, phone in hand, staring at nothing. Her voice still echoed in my ears, soft and fragile, threading its way through every memory I had ever tried to bury. "Goodbye, Ayan." I replayed it, and then again, and again. Each time, I hoped I had misheard her. That may be, if I listened closely enough, there would be something more, a hesitation, a hint of uncertainty, a sign that she hadn't truly meant to say goodbye. But there was nothing, no second chances, no unsaid words waiting between the pauses, no hidden meaning that could change the truth. She had called me one last time, and I hadn't answered. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of life, but nothing felt real. Conversations became background noise. Laughter from my friends grated against my skin, sharp and unnatural. I was trapped in a loop, stuck between the past and the present, between what had happened and what could have been. Every night I played the voicemail. Every night I wondered if things would have been different if I had answered. Would she have told me what was really on her mind? Would I have been able to stop whatever happened next? Or was it already too late? I didn't know. And that was the worst part of all. Chapter 3. The Truth I Never Knew. The funeral was held on a cold morning. The kind of morning that bites at your skin and sinks into your bones, making everything feel heavier. The sky was overcast, the clouds thick and unmoving, as if even the universe had paused to mourn her. I stood at the back, hands stuffed into my pockets, my heart a dead weight in my chest. I didn't belong there. Everyone knew it. Her parents barely looked at me. Her mother's eyes were red, swollen from crying, but when she caught sight of me, her expression turned cold. I understood. She had never liked me much. Even when Maya and I were together, she thought I was reckless, selfish, and maybe she was right. But what hurt more was that Maya's father, the man who had once welcomed me into their home, who had always given me a nod of approval whenever I showed up at their doorstep, wouldn't even acknowledge my presence. I deserved it, because I wasn't just an ex-boyfriend attending a funeral. I was the last person Maya had tried to reach, and I had ignored her. I didn't speak to anyone that day. I stayed on the outskirts, watching as people cried, as they placed flowers on her coffin, as they whispered words of farewell that she would never hear. And then there was Rishi, Maya's best friend. He stood near the front, his shoulders tense, his jaw set, his eyes burning with something I couldn't quite place. He had always been protective of her, always hated me for the way I had treated her, for the fights, the distance, the breakup. I knew he would never forgive me. I just didn't expect him to confront me. But as people began to leave, as the crowd thinned and the whispers faded into silence, Rishi turned and walked straight toward me. I barely had time to react before he grabbed me by the collar and shoved me backward, his voice low and filled with venom. "She waited for you, you know." My breath caught in my throat. "She waited for you even when she knew you weren't coming back." I swallowed hard, trying to find words, but nothing came. Rishi's hands were shaking. His eyes were bloodshot, dark circles under them, like he hadn't slept in days. "She was sick, Ayan." His voice cracked. "She didn't tell anyone, not even me. Not until it was too late." The world tilted. "What?" My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Rishi let out a bitter laugh. "You didn't know." He shook his head, his grip tightening on my collar. "Of course you didn't, because you weren't there." A sharp pain shot through my chest. She had been in and out of the hospital for months. His voice was thick with emotion. "She tried to pretend everything was fine, but I saw it. I saw the weight loss, the exhaustion, the way she hid her pain behind fake smiles. I felt like I couldn't breathe. She didn't want anyone to worry. She didn't want to be a burden." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Not even to you." The words hit me harder than any punch ever could. I had spent months avoiding her calls, thinking she was just trying to drag me back into a past. I had been trying to escape. I had convinced myself that ignoring her was the right thing to do, that she would be fine without me. But she hadn't been fine. She had been dying, and I had left her alone. I don't remember how I got home that day. One moment, I was at the funeral, my hands trembling, my mind spinning. The next, I was in my room, staring blankly at the ceiling, my phone in my hand, Maya's voicemail playing on repeat. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry for everything, and I hope you're happy." I really do. Happy. How could I ever be happy after this? How could I live knowing that the one person who had always been there for me had spent her last days in pain, while I had spent mine pretending she didn't exist? I pressed play again and again. Each time, the words sank deeper into my skin, carving themselves into my soul. "Goodbye, Ayan. Goodbye." The last thing she had ever said to me. A final farewell that I had never gotten to return. A goodbye that I would have to live with for the rest of my life. Chapter 4. The goodbye I never gave. The days after Maya's funeral felt like walking through a thick fog. Everything around me moved, but I stayed frozen in place. The world continued as if nothing had happened. The sun still rose. People still laughed. Life went on. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice. "Goodbye, Ayan." It haunted me. I stopped answering messages, stopped picking up calls. My parents knocked on my door, asking if I was okay, but I never answered. Because how do you tell someone that you're drowning in regret? I sat in my room for hours, replaying the voicemail, looking at old pictures of her, reading through our texts, searching for something, anything that would make me feel close to her again. But all I found was guilt, crushing, overwhelming, unforgiving guilt. I had spent so much time being angry at her, for calling, for trying to hold on to something I thought was broken, for making me feel things I didn't want to feel. And now I wished more than anything that she would call me one last time, that my phone would ring and I'd see her name, that I'd have one more chance to answer. But it was too late, and that was the worst part of all. It was Rishi who finally forced me to leave my house. A week after the funeral, he showed up at my door, looking more exhausted than I felt. His eyes were sunken, his clothes wrinkled, his face hollow. I almost didn't let him in, but before I could shut the door, he muttered something that made my stomach drop. "She left something for you." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. "What?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his voice quieter this time. Maya, he swallowed hard. She wrote you a letter. A letter. My hands clenched into fists. Of course she did, because Maya had always known me better than I knew myself. She knew I would never answer. She knew I would never forgive myself. And so she had left something behind, a piece of her waiting for me. The letter was in a small white envelope, my name written on the front in her handwriting. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely think. Rishi didn't say anything. He just stood there, waiting. When I finally tore it open, my hands were shaking. And then I saw the words she had left for me. Ayan, I know you won't pick up, so I'm writing this instead. I hope you read it. I hope you don't ignore me this time. I don't want you to feel guilty. I don't want you to carry this weight on your shoulders. But I know you will, because that's who you are. And because, if the roles were reversed, I'd feel the same way. There are so many things I wish I could tell you. So many things I wish I had said before it was too late. But I'll start with this. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for holding on when you wanted to let go. I'm sorry for the calls you didn't answer, for the messages you ignored. I knew you didn't want to talk. I knew you needed space. I didn't want to disappear without saying goodbye. And I know now that maybe it would have been easier for you. Maybe you wouldn't have to carry this now. But you were my best friend, Ayan. Even after everything, even after the hurt, the anger, the distance, I still cared. And I hope in some small way you still cared too. I didn't tell you the truth because I didn't want you to come back out of guilt. I wanted you to come back because you missed me. But I guess, in the end, it doesn't matter. Because the truth is, I missed you. And maybe, if things had been different, if we had been different, we wouldn't have ended up here. But this is where we are. And this is my goodbye. Please don't let it be yours. Please don't carry this forever. Live, Ayan. For me, Maya. I don't know how long I sat there after I finished reading. The letter trembled in my hands. My vision blurred. For the first time since she died, I let the tears fall. Not silent ones. Not the kind you wipe away quickly, hoping no one notices. These were the kind that broke something inside you. The kind that shattered the walls you had built. The kind that ripped through you like a storm, leaving nothing behind but wreckage. Rishi didn't say anything. He just sat beside me as I fell apart, because he had lost her too. And maybe, in some small way, that made it hurt a little less. That night, I listened to her voicemail one last time. Then, with trembling fingers, I deleted it. Not because I wanted to forget her, but because she had asked me to live. And for the first time since she left, I was ready to try.